So let's take a look at our text. It is a woman named Esther, who is one of the great heroines of the Bible. Esther was an orphan, a Jewish orphan who was a part of the diaspora when the Jews were enslaved. She had no family except for a cousin named Mordecai, who sometimes gave her good advice and sometimes didn't. But she had nobody. And so from the beginning of her life, she had ocean upon ocean washing over her whole being. Until one day, the Persian king by the name of King Ahasuerus invites Esther to come in and be a part of the harem of the Persian court. Now you may say, well, that doesn't sound like a good job to be a harem in the harem of a king of Persia. But if you had nothing else in your life, that would be a good job option. So Esther rises up in the court until she becomes queen of Persia under King Ahasuerus. Now, once she becomes queen, that is when the real oceans wash over Esther. An ocean of a genocide. That is, that the Persians wanted, particularly a person by the name of Haman, wanted to eradicate, annihilate, to destroy all Jewish people, like something that you might see out of the Holocaust. And that is when Mordecai comes to his cousin Esther and says, Esther, will you stand up for the Jewish people? A huge ocean washes over Esther. And this is where she had to decide what she would risk for something greater. In other words, if she went to the king and said that he must save the Jewish people, she herself could be killed, her whole family could be killed, her cousin could be killed. And that's where we pick up our text. And so Mordecai is coming into her with a list of demands. You must do this, Esther. But that's where Esther, to use the theme of the morning, builds a boundary that gives her space to determine her next steps. So let's take a look at our text. Again, we're looking at the book of Esther, and if you've never read that book, I encourage you to do so. It's only 10 short chapters, but here is what she says to Mordecai. Now, there isn't a hard no in the text. There's actually a go. But you can read the word no in her here. And then she says this. She says to Mordecai, go and gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. So this is the first thing that a no can do for a person. It can give you space to develop spiritual support. That's what Esther's doing. She's developing a whole group of supporters. You have a big decision in your life, and they come at you and they say, I need you to make a decision. Your no can give you time to build spiritual supporters. But that's not the only thing she says. She says, go and gather people to continue to fast and pray. She said, do not eat or drink for 3 days, or day or night. Now, when Esther is saying this, she's also talking about the second thing that a no can do. It can buy you time. Time. Sometimes that's all you need to make a decision. Whether it's a small one, like whether your kid will do a sleepover, or a big one, like you're going to take a new job, you need time. She said, we're going to wait 3 days. And then finally she says this, I and all of my attendants will fast as you do. And fasting is just another word for prayer in the Bible. So she said, I am going to say no to you in order to get spiritual support, in order to pray, and in order to have time. So Esther does that, and when she says this, she says, when it is done, I will go to the king, and even though it is against the law for a Jewish slave to speak up to a Persian king, I will stand up for the Jewish people. And she says, if I perish, I will perish. We know from history that Esther does stand up for the Jewish people, and she saves an entire people group. But again, how did that happen? It happened with the beginning of her saying no, so that she could have a boundary to have space for the next steps in her life. So this is a tough concept, I realize. This is complicated to think about no as a self-preserving technique. Here's another illustration of this. People tell me all the time that I need to watch this movie or that on Netflix or Amazon Prime. But honestly, most of the movies that I see are so dark and dreary and yucky that I can't watch more than like half of an episode before I push stop. But the one genre of shows that I have been watching are nature shows. And I always find there's something comforting in watching like animals in nature. So there was one this last week from the Canadian Rockies, and it featured a little mama grizzly bear and her little 4 or 5 cubs. And so it showed these little cubs playing around. They were sort of wrestling with each other. They were getting into little bear cub trouble. And then they would sometimes jump up on the mom, and they would kind of like roughhouse. But then what would happen is the mama would do kind of a little paw, like pushing away one of these little cubs. Or she'd give it a little nip. And the narrator of the show would say, and I love narrators of nature shows, maybe that's why I like them, the mother cub is not hurting the baby cub, but is showing the baby cub who the mama is. And it gives her opportunities to decide what to do next. That is exactly what I'm talking about today. It gives you a boundary that can buy you space for the next steps.